In this video, we're going to jump back into the tunnel systems. Now we're going to talk about underground kitchens. I have heard these given a few different names. One of them I came across is a Dien Bien Phu kitchen. There was another name for it, which I know I would slaughter it if I tried pronouncing it because it's in Vietnamese. Or it's named after the person that came up with the general design. Now, before I talk about the design here, I will mention I came across one site that posted some remembrances or interviews that were done with Viet Cong veterans. They were asked, well, how did they cook underground? And the main things that the person put in this article that he drew from those interviews, he had talked to 3 different people. One person said that inside the tunnels it was always hot, it was always humid, it stank, and so did they. And when the shafts to carry away the smoke from the kitchens were not working properly, that smoke was escaping, it made the tunnels a little bit harder to live in. It still wasn't completely unbearable, but it wasn't very comfortable. Another person pointed out that they hardly ever cooked underground because the heat that was produced made it that much worse inside the tunnels, so that as often as possible they would go above ground and do the cooking on the surface and then bring the food down inside. That was repeated by the last person who was a medical officer. He said the same thing, that typically they would cook above ground. When they did not get the chance to do that, they would eat foods that required little to no preparation, and he said the Americans were great for supplying them on that, because the Americans were always leaving behind C rations that they didn't want to eat. They just discarded them, left them on the ground, or they would mispack parts of their C rations. They would drop it when they were packing it up, whatever it turned out to be. When the Americans were killed, they had the rations on them. They would just take them from the packs. When the South Vietnamese were killed, or the Montagnards that were helping Special Forces were killed, they had rations with them, and the Viet Cong would take those and use them when they were not able to prepare food. Now, the main issues that I can think of with the underground kitchens was inadequate ventilation. You're going to want to push the smoke up and out of the tunnel. So you're going to want that forced air going into the kitchen from somewhere else, and it's going to have to escape. So the best way it can escape is those shafts coming from off of the stove or higher up on the ceiling, where the smoke would be collecting a little bit to push it up and out. Now, the stoves were dug in the ground. Just the entire room is obviously dug in the soil. Well, they left this little rectangular box going across one corner. Dug out the front a little bit, going into about the center to create their little cook chamber where their fire was going to be. On the top, they dug it out, supposed to be just large enough that they could set their pot right over the top of it, and would give a good seal right over the top of the fire. But as the one person pointed out, didn't always work that way. You then had a little cut in the back here that went into a shaft. That shaft went up to a sump. Shaft went up to another sump, and those sumps were to collect rainwater if somehow water got inside. It also helped with, say, you're ending up with any type of greasy smoke because of what you're burning. Well, that grease is going to kind of collect up in here and not go all the way up and out. Then it comes up into here, into that final shaft, goes up into termite mounds. you have 1 or 2 holes on it. Small, they would look like the holes on an actual termite mound, and the smoke would be dissipated out of the mound. In the tour of the Coochie Tunnels video that I had posted on the tunnel system video, the guide mentioned that they did put some stuff around these openings on these little smokestacks to prevent bugs from crawling inside. And technically, if they did crawl inside, they're going to end up inside these sumps. Not as likely they're going to make it all the way through, but it can still happen. I came across one diagram that showed having a vent up here near the top of the ceiling, that if smoke did somehow get up in here, if it's up near the top, the smoke should, in theory, travel up and out, and it would have 1 or 2 sumps in that also. Now down here we have a view from above. We have the kitchen here, the shaft that goes up to the sump, shaft to the sump, and then when it leaves that sump, it branches out to multiple locations, to multiple hills, to dissipate, to spread that smoke out. I have read things that talked about these shafts in here, as much as possible, were bamboo, or at least clay lined. They did prefer dirt, at least somewhat, in these sumps on the sides and that, to maybe try to dissipate some of the smoke and stuff in the smoke out. Reportedly, the whole purpose of doing it like this was to cut down the smoke so much that when it came out of the termite mounds or the bushes that it was pushed through, whatever, it pretty much had no color, very little smell and all that stuff. And as I mentioned in the first video on the tunnel systems, they would try to do their cooking during times where the smoke would not be noticed, like doing it at night so it would be not seen because of the darkness, or they would do it early in the morning when there's mist on the ground to blend it in with that mist, with that fog. Now, improvements that I think should be made. First off, eliminate this hole right up here. You're probably better off with putting some type of sheet metal, sheet steel, or steel plate up there, basically creating this like a oven top, like a griddle. That increases the things you can do cooking inside that kitchen also. And it cuts down on the smoke escaping up and out. Another thing, have some type of door or plug that you can put on the front here, but still make sure you have that vent so that air can come up inside here to keep oxygen going to the fire and to help push it out the shaft. Keep the fire that you have inside here as small as possible, as small as is needed. That can only be learned by experience. I would recommend adding that vent up near the ceiling to take smoke out that does somehow escape, in order to keep it from getting too unbearable inside there for smoke and smells and all that stuff. Another thing you might want to consider is putting some type of fan in here, good sized, say a along the lines of, say, a box fan like you see for a house. Those square ones that they used to use all the time on floors and that would sit on the floor and would push air through rooms in a house, especially when you're doing construction in them or remodeling. Have something like that in there. Possibly run off some type of generator system with the generator located somewhere else. Maybe run off of some type of battery system. Or maybe you can come up with a way of attaching the fan to, say, a bike, a stationary type bike, using that to power the fan. And then you get that pushing of the air in there, so you get a bit of an overpressure in here that will push that smoke up and out, and that in theory should also help with some of the heat also. Especially this vent up here, that'll allow a lot of heat to escape up and out also. So probably your entrance into the kitchen will be lower. It's not going to be a full 6-foot entrance. Maybe it's going to be a 3-foot, 4-foot entrance that someone can come in. So the heat, as it rises, it's going to trap up in here. You have that fan going, the ventilation in here pushing it. Well, the heat's going to get pushed up and out this way. Smoke, in theory, will get pushed up and out this way. Any smoke that somehow does seep through will get pushed up and out also. That's something to consider. Those are the improvements that I could think of right off the bat. I would not recommend storing food inside the kitchen area, because you have these shafts going to the outside. The food that's inside here will attract them, or will attract pests. It'll attract critters, it'll attract insects, and you want to limit that as much as possible, them getting inside. Maybe up across here, put some type of mesh, chicken wire, something up across here, across that vent, to keep those critters from getting through. You might want to think about the same down here. So, considerations on how to improve your tunnel systems. Now, ideally, whatever way you do for preparing food underground should not be a combustion source. It should not be some type of liquid fuel. I really do not recommend a liquid fuel like propane or liquid gas, anything like that. You probably shouldn't even use a fire underground, because it's consuming the oxygen also. So your best bet would probably be some type of hot plate or something like that. If that's the route you go, then you're going to have the vent up here over the top, and then possibly some type of fan on that vent, which will suck air and the smoke and all that stuff up and out the shaft. Because obviously, if you're using some type of hot plate or electric type stove inside there, you have electricity, so you can supply electricity to the exhaust fan also. Things to consider. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot and Militia movements, always remember, essayons.